I'm Meta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, but we're going to go to British Columbia today. What a few years ago they were calling Supernatural British Columbia. I love that title. But anyway, I don't know whether we're going to Supernatural or just Natural British Columbia today, but we get to talk to a friend of mine, Mike Simpson. Mike is a guy who's spent his whole career, I think, doing work in civil society on various kinds of social issues. And today, I think we need to get right down to talking about what Canadians should know and do about climate change, because this is very much on his mind as it is on mine, and it better be on yours too, because we're really up against it. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Meta. It's so nice to see you again.
Wonderful. I haven't been to BC in, oh my God, 10 years maybe. So I only get my thrills vicariously.
If you came out to British Columbia this year, it's pretty shocking. We've declared a climate emergency in Parliament. All the parties declared a climate emergency in 2019. And the reality of that emergency is really starting to catch up, not just in the real world, but in people's psyches, in their minds. Because we had the heat dome in June, and you saw those temperatures, right? I was actually traveling very close to Lytton about 2 days before it hit that crazy temperature of 49.6 degrees. That's just a phenomenal Canadian temperature. And that temperature scared people, I think, because I think the previous record was in Saskatchewan or something at 43 degrees. And then we had this Lytton get so hot one day, and then the next day it got hotter again. And then the next day the place burnt down. And of course, everybody has seen how many fires we've had this summer as well.
Yeah, but tell me about Lytton in particular, because I've never been there, but it's a little town, right? Or
yeah,
it was a little town. What is left of it?
Nothing. It's wiped out, and there's people that are living, families that have had to come here to the Sunshine Coast. I know of a family that's putting up their family in Lytton, and it's actually an interesting town because years ago, back in the 1980s, I made a film, and it was based out of that area because that area is very close to what's called the Stein, and the Stein was an area that people were trying to save, and so I actually interviewed some of the elders from the band there, and Ruby Dunstan, I think her name was, the chief. And Lytton was a small little logging town. There was like a logging operation going there, but it was also, there are a lot of Indigenous people living in that area, First Nations. And it's sort of right near in that Kamloops dry area. So you know how the rain hits the West Coast and BC, and then there's a rain shadow, and then it gets very dry and hot. And that area, when I went through, it was 45 degrees out. I got out of the vehicle that I was in and actually walked around and realized, wow, I've never felt this. Like, I've traveled, I've been all over the world. I've been to the Sahara Desert, and I've never felt 45 degrees. And it's quite frightening because you realize, wow, if I was actually out here and I couldn't, get into shelter, I probably would die in those temperatures. It's that hot.
Well, I expect some people did die. Haven't seen any count.
800. 800 people died.
Is that for the whole West Coast, or is it
in British Columbia?
British Columbia. Because it's not just BC. I was talking to a guy in Seattle, so I presume it went down the coast quite a bit into the US as well.
Oh yeah, the entire Northwest was stuck under a heat dome, and then it moved over into Alberta and Saskatchewan, where it baked there. And you've seen the drought in Alberta and Saskatchewan. It's the worst. It's worse than the 1930s. They're saying. I had read that it's certainly the worst in 50 years. I saw that, and you could see that the farmers were actually having to plow under all of the crops because they weren't even going to be able to salvage them for livestock. That's how bad it is. Like the prairies, it is an unbelievable drought on the prairies. The British Columbia is on fire. There was hundreds of fires going on here. If you look at a forest, and this is something you should do a show on this at some point, because there's a map called the Global Forest Watch map that anybody can Google. Okay, just Google Global Forest Watch map fires, and what you'll get is a live picture right now of all of the registered fires on the planet that we can see, and it is stunning. You quickly see that we're on fire. The entire planet is on fire. There are places in the Amazon where you'll just see scattered hundreds of fires. And what you could do, and the reason I did it at that time, I was trying to show people, look, we're having our huge fires here, like the White Lake fire, or I think it's called the White Lake fire. It's right near Kamloops. It's just massive, massive fire. And then there was all these other ones going on. And there's 200 fires, and it looks like British Columbia is on fire. But then if you go over to Greece, it's on fire. If you go over to Russia, it's on fire.
Yeah, Siberia has had the worst fires imaginable too.
Meta, in June, do you know what happened in Siberia? Above the Arctic Circle, the ground temperature hit 48 degrees. So remember, that's not air temperature, would have been lower, but the ground temperature hit 48 degrees. And you know what that does to the permafrost. So we believe, and scientists have analyzed what happened in June, they believe there may have been something like a 50 megaton release of methane. And you know what that does? It blows all of the efforts that we have done to just reduce. In Canada, we only managed to reduce about 8 megatons in our best year, 2019, I think it was. I mean, somebody can correct me on those stats, but just in the back of my head, it's not very much, right? We have worked so hard to try and get the graph to come down. And in Canada, the emissions have only gone up, 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 up. We haven't been able to pull them down like other countries. But when we did get a little bit of an anomaly, we got a little bit.
Are you talking about carbon in general? We haven't been able to pull down, or methane in particular, right? Well, I'm not aware of Canada's methane emissions as such, separate from the overall CO, the carbon.
Yeah, and the reason is that carbon is the one that we're generally using as kind of like an indicator, and it's one we can measure, and we have a lot of statistics on it, right? But in actual fact,
methane is much less. But when you get blowouts of methane like that, it's going to be it's going to be equal to, or comparable anyway, to the effect of carbon dioxide too.
Actually, far worse, Meta. The problem is that methane there's 5 greenhouse gases, and methane is 83 times more powerful a greenhouse gas. So when we release a little bit of methane, it's like releasing a lot of carbon. When I was walking around campaigning the other day in Vancouver, it was very easy to talk about the climate emergency because the entire city was enveloped in smoke from the interior and from Washington. Because, we now call it Smogust here in British Columbia, because every August we just get stuck in a massive cloud it's not a cloud, it's a massive blanket of smoke from the fires. And they may be from Washington, or they may be from the interior. The interior of British Columbia, people were leaving and coming to the coast because they couldn't breathe it anymore.
You don't have to convince me that it's an emergency. Yeah. I've been, screaming from the rooftops for as long as I can recall. But you can't convince some people. And I think it varies from one person and one group and one society to another. Some countries are just more reluctant to recognize it. The Russians in general have been much less. I'm in touch with a lot of people in Russia, and they've been less aware of it and less ready to blow the whistle. But the other day, the government officially began to say, maybe this is kind of a bad thing, For a long time, the Russian point of view was, or a very prominent point of view in the Russian discourse, was the notion that, we're all going to get a lot of benefit from this because it's going to melt all that permafrost, and we can use all that land now for agriculture, which we couldn't have done before. Yeah. The New York Times, believe it or not, had a story to that effect, a long article, I think it was in the magazine several months ago, making that very claim, never once mentioning that there might be some downside to melting the permafrost. Siberia has, I've seen a graph showing how much of the world's permafrost is located, not permafrost, but carbon in the soil is located in different places. And it's like, I'm exaggerating, but not much, like half of the world's carbon in the soil is in Siberia. It's just miles deep. It's really thick. And you melt that stuff, game over.
Yeah, it's the methane that's locked in that permafrost that if that releases, then we get you get what are sort of tipping points, or you get accelerated events or toilet bowl scenarios where everything starts to go much, much faster. And one of the big questions that we have right now is, are we already in that? Because that's been the dreaded scenario for a couple of decades now, as climate scientists predict what could happen. Because you can have, obviously, if the methane releases and we get an acceleration, then if the ice caps melt, then you lose the ability of the ice caps to be able to reflect the sunlight and so on. So it starts to accelerate. And one of the questions right now is, are we in that acceleration already? And the big thing here is that I think that many of us get it in our heads that we're in an emergency. I mean, you get it, I get it. But what I really asked myself about 6 months ago is, do I truly understand the concept of an emergency in my heart, like in a sort of more limbic way? Because it's very easy to intellectualize carbon and see it on a graph and look at the numbers, but to actually understand what it means, that's an area that we have. It's a bit like the nuclear war issue that people used to talk about, that you could understand that there was 35,000 nuclear warheads, but to really understand what it meant if it all went off was much harder for people to grasp because it's overwhelming.
Inside scoop. It's still with us.
Yeah,
and there are people who say that it's worse than it was during the Cold War, partly because they're ignoring it. But anyway, so we've handled that one. Now let's move on back to global warming.
Well, no, it's related, right? Because the idea is that to be a global citizen in today's world, one has to kind of shoulder some of this anxiety, whether it's nuclear anxiety and the idea that we could all blow each other up at any time, or the climate emergency, in which we do seem to be catastrophically heading towards tipping points. And the problem here is how to emotionally deal with it, in the sense that if we're activists, if we're people that are active in this business, we have to be able to maintain our energy and our enthusiasm. But what's going on in the climate world is that people have seen the emergency. We knew the emergency was coming 20 years ago. And we knew that certain points, once we get to certain points, that's game over, that's game over, that's game over. And so when the IPCC came out a couple of weeks ago, and they fundamentally said that it was unequivocal. That's the key word, unequivocal. It's not ambiguous. There is absolutely no question that things are now irreversible. Many things are irreversible. That's really stark, especially if you got kids, right? Because if you look at the graph, Meta, this is the problem. We are, the way they've done the statistics, everybody says we've got to be 60% below 2005 levels on emissions. That's where we're trying to get to by 2030. Get to net zero by 2050, meaning that we're not pumping out any more carbon into the atmosphere. And that will keep the net carbon budget, which is the total amount of carbon that we can put into the atmosphere, at the prescribed level. Okay, that's the goal. The problem is that if it's based on 3 different scenarios. One is 100% security, and that one passed. Right? We've already missed that. And then there's a 66%, and then there's a 1 in 2 scenario. Like you got a 1 in 2 chance of surviving. Now, if you take a 1 in 2 chance, you can lower the numbers, and that's what's happened. We've lowered the numbers, trying to hang on to hope and tell people still do something. But people haven't fundamentally understood, if this keeps going, we're going to hit 3.5 degrees. Some say as much as 7 degrees by the end of the century. And we're at a 1.1 degree change right now, and we've got forest fires. We've got the entire intertidal zone. And I go out here I live near the ocean here. The entire intertidal zone, the estimate was that we lost billions of organisms in June because they baked. So the entire intertidal zone was rotting. Okay, these are the things that are starting to come up. We're okay. Well, I'm breathing smoke all day. There's fires all over the planet. The intertidal zone is dead, and the temperature is so hot that I can't go outside. That's now at 1.1. You see the issue? And so the idea is, how do you actually get it so that your average person who's walking around starts to put 2 and 2 together and go, no, this isn't the future anymore. This is now. Okay. It's right now.
Look, I have had a number of shows about permafrost and about the Arctic Ocean. I'm particularly concerned about the Arctic, where the ice is melting, and that right there, because the Arctic is heating twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Yeah. And the Arctic Ocean, once that ice goes, instead of being white and reflecting, it's black. The water is black and absorbs. So that's already a tipping point right there. And then you have Greenland ice sheet. That can be all gone, not long. They're calculating how long that's going to last. And they figure some estimates up to 4 meters of increase in ocean depth, so that comes up.
Yeah, you're bringing up a good point, which is people, just to understand the amount of energy. Al Gore, I was at the Paris meeting, the Paris summit, okay, when all this was going on. And Al Gore stood up at the front in front of all the world's leaders. And he put up a slide, and I couldn't believe it. I had to go home and check it. But he put up a slide of an atomic bomb going off. You've seen lots of pictures of those. It's an amazing amount of energy. it wasn't a megaton, but it was a kiloton atomic bomb. Boom, big bomb. And he goes, do you know that the amount of energy that we have absorbed into our oceans and into our planet and into our world is equal to, and this is because of anthropocentric climate change. So that's not because of, the sun hitting the earth. That's because of the changes that we've made to the planet. He said it's equal to 400,000 of those bombs going off a day for 365 days. And I couldn't believe that. I was like, come on, it can't be that much. 400,000 atomic bombs. And all that energy had to go somewhere. And most of it got absorbed into the oceans. So the oceans are a huge bank. They're absorbing all that energy, and they can't do it forever, because what happens is we acidify. We get all this acidification. Look what happens to our salmon populations. The currents start changing, or even just take hurricanes. What causes hurricanes is that the base temperature of the oceans gets to be too high, and then you get these huge anomalies in terms of so suddenly we get like 4 or 5 category 5 hurricanes, and our hurricane season goes nuts. This whole scenario has all been known, and you talk to the scientists about it. And the problem is that at some point politically, here's the basic thing is I've spent my entire life talking about these things, trying to get people and educate so that people can understand. Our problem is we've run out of time. There's going to be a report coming up. We don't have time to educate everybody anymore. There's literally no time. So now what we have is the decision makers that are in place fundamentally must understand this, because we're not going to even have enough time to get the right governments in place. Or how can we have a prime minister who declares a climate emergency, and then within days he bought a $4.5 billion pipeline, which is now, by the way, getting closer to 13 billion, and people estimate probably 20 billion. So we invested $20 billion, and instead of fighting climate change, we bought a pipeline. And this is crazy because, the International Energy Agency, which is a very conservative organization, has come out and said absolutely no to any new fossil fuel infrastructure. And here in Canada, we keep investing. So we clearly don't understand. It's clear, absolutely clear to me that politically in Ottawa, they're not understanding it's an emergency, because you don't behave like this in an emergency.
All my friends, of course, accept the reality of climate change, all my real friends, but they have different attitudes about how to do it. Some people say, don't scare people. You want to give them uplifting, hopeful messages. And I say, you want to scare people. You want to tell people, look, this is life and death. Your house is on fire. This is the mantra that these young kids use when they're in the streets. And that's the kind of message that we need to hear. What do you think?
I think both, like it's neither an either or, because I think we do need to have enough hope in our hearts that there are alternatives, and there are ways forward, and there's ways that we can rapidly change, and we can look to who has done that, and from that get inspiration. I mean, it's great to be able to look at Denmark and go, that today Denmark is running off of 80% renewables, 47% wind. They did it, right? That's inspiring, because then you can go, look, it's possible. And that's what people have to hear in this country, is because everybody goes, oh, it's impossible, you can't do it. It's like, no, it's being done. You just need to go to the right places and see those hopeful stories. Those are critical, so that we have a pathway out, right? And people can see that. But at the same time, if you're in a lifeboat and it's sinking, you better square with everybody, because somebody's got to start bailing and paddling like it matters. Particularly young people. I don't give them it's all going to be okay if you just recycle story. I just don't. I look them in the eyes and tell them, you got scooped. In your lifetime, you're going to see 3.5 degrees and the graph is not changing. What do you want to do about it? Because you're going to have to take action. You can't look to others right now to take action. Every single person is going to have to ask themselves, what am I going to do? Because even on the adaptive side, what are you going to do about your house? What are you going to do about your garden? What are you going to do about your water supply? In my riding right now, right here in the backyard, right now I'm having to save water and shower, because we're in a stage 4 water restriction because of the drought, and we've never had this happen. And in 3 or 4 weeks, they just put out an emergency thing that we're going to turn the taps off in Canada. There's going to be no water for the hospital, no water for people's homes, period. We've never had anything like this. And this is the reality. What I'm getting at is that people have to ask themselves, well, what are you going to do? And we can't rely on even just one, like I'm in the Green Party, but we can't rely on the Green Party to do this. We need an all-party climate emergency parliamentary attempt to try and put all of our heads together, the best ideas from every party, and let's try and solve this like human beings who are literally in a lifeboat. Like if you're in a lifeboat, you don't care if the person's green or blue or NDP. I don't care. We need to paddle. We need to bail, right? That's what we need to do right now. Yeah.
Okay. Now, but some of the things, the scary part is there isn't a really good answer. Methane, for example, once it's in the atmosphere, what are you going to do about it? And the stuff is coming up out of the East Siberian shelf of the ocean, Arctic Ocean, and it's coming up in big plumes. I saw an image of a ship going through there, and it looked like a plane going through clouds. Everywhere around there were these white things, except you could see them popping up, puffs of cloud coming up ahead of you, so that you don't see that with clouds. But apart from that, you'd say you were in deep clouds. This was methane, these ships going through it. How can you capture something once it's in the atmosphere? Well, I'm even following and doing talk shows with people who have geoengineering solutions. We don't like to use that word. People don't like that word. And okay, but there are a couple of potential solutions, but everybody knows that we don't really know what might happen as the side effects of these things. One is there's a group of people who are going to put up something, and they're going to use iron salt aerosols and see if they can conk out methane in the atmosphere and turn it into CO2. CO2 is no fun, but it's a whole lot better than the methane. And if that works, good. But are there side effects? Well, it's hard to anticipate.
Do you think it's moral or ethical, in your opinion, to experiment at that scale on the planet?
Nobody's saying do the whole thing. People are just saying do an experiment quickly. Right. And see what you can find out as soon as possible. Right. Because, we don't want to do the whole hog without knowing, and yet we need it right now. But they won't let you. There have been efforts to do, for example, cloud brightening. Now, that's the second most promising thing, I think, or maybe it's the most promising, I don't know which. But it's one thing where you would have ships emit tiny, tiny particles of salt into the clouds and shoot it up, and it makes it makes white clouds as opposed to black clouds if you have tiny particles, and this could create much more white clouds around the planet, especially if you were doing it in the Arctic, and it would immediately reflect heat back, so we wouldn't be getting as much sunshine and heat from the sun as usual. But what might that cause in terms of storms elsewhere, or who knows what happens? Nobody feels confident about doing it. But when you're up against what looked to me like a life and death situation, if you don't do anything, check it out.
Well, I'm not in favor of that sort of engineering at that scale, because I think that ultimately the way that the natural world works is if we think that we can control it like that, we inevitably lose. It's controlling us. We are a part of it, not us able to do things to it like that. And what we have to figure out in this one is, here's the thing, when COVID came along, look how quickly aviation shut down. Look how quickly we can, if we are all motivated, bang.
Aviation shut down, but as well as I do, it didn't make a diff of bitterance in terms of the amount of CO2 emissions. Still went up.
They still went up, yes. They didn't go up. What I'm getting at is our human.
We don't, not enough to make a difference. I'm sorry, but we have to do something much more drastic than that. Like not letting people out of their house. Keep us in lockdown, and that might make a difference.
I guess my point is that if and when we decide something is an emergency, we are able to shut things down. That's what I'm trying to get at. We decided that, yes, if you got on a plane, this was particularly dangerous. And so we shut it down. So what I'm getting at is, if we take the same attitudinal shift and go, actually, the climate emergency is real. Our problem as a species is that it's not in front of us. Like, if you actually have to, how many people would have to be in the hospital on a ventilator before they would admit that actually COVID is real? There's been that phenomenal That to me is phenomenal, that you would have to be sick and dying in the hospital with a respirator on, and then you will admit it's real. That's essentially the human problem we have with climate change, is that we won't see it. And the people that are far ahead of the game saying, look, it's coming, those folks have a different way of thinking. And our problem is, we're never going to get some people to catch up to the idea that climate change is actually real. So that's where it becomes so important that we just push the decision makers. The decision makers right now is who we have to be focusing on. Do they understand? Can they fully grasp it?
Politicians, they want to get elected, and they look at, which way the wind is blowing.
Well, that's no time for that. There's no time for that. Right. Like in my riding, it's interesting because I'm up against all the other parties, and everybody's claiming to be green. Everybody's claiming on climate change, which is a change. That's actually a shift from 10 years ago, when people would have, they would have seen it as fringe, or 20 years ago. Now it's the core issue in our riding by far. And when you go door to door, that's what everybody wants to talk about. So we've hit a certain point in the consciousness of people, including the politicians. And now the question is how, and how quickly, and how seriously. Those are the questions that are on the table now. And what I'm saying, and I think what other scientists are saying, or even just take the head of the United Nations, he's basically said, look, it's a red alert. He says, push your button on the finger of a red alert button. That's the stage we're at. And that's interesting to hear the head of the United Nations stand up and say that right now. It's a red alert situation. That used to be stuff we would say because we could see it coming, and now it kind of catches up to the mainstream. And then the question is, at what point does that translate into policy change, immediate policy change? And we have 4 years from that. Here's the thing is that we have very little time, Meta, so little time. It looks like crazy hopeless, but we've got to do something.
Give me some of your priorities. In what order do you want to urge people to do what?
The first one is that we absolutely must try to commit to 60% below 2005 levels as a minimum. That's a minimum. And actually, the problem is many countries will not be able to meet. So what they're called is nationally determined targets. And they're basically this idea that each country will commit to a certain amount of emissions reductions. And then we calculate the whole thing, and we figure out, well, where's that going to leave us? If you do that right now, you calculate everybody's commitments, including Canada's and the United States, we still hit 3.5 degrees. So it's like, so everybody has said we need to increase our ambition. As they go to the meetings and everybody goes, increase our ambition, be more ambitious, because otherwise we're all going to die. So Canada is supposed to increase its ambition. So we were at 30%. And now the government is saying that, and the NDP will say, oh, we'll get to 50, or the government says we'll get to 40 to 45. But the needed requirement of the science is 60 minimum. And then if you take all the other countries and you go, are they going to be able to do it? Probably not. It means that Canada, ultimately, if we were smart here, would go even higher. That gets to be harder and harder the more time goes by. So the faster we move, the better. So the number one priority is that we commit to that, and we figure out instantly how to do that. We know how to do it quickly because there's a certain number of emitters. They're called large-scale emitters in Canada, and we shut them down, or we lower their emissions, and we do well really quick. Like cement plants, for example, are extremely high emitters, or refineries, extremely high emitters. So we know where to go to get that big low-bearing fruit fast. And here's the key thing. We absolutely must say no to any future fossil fuel infrastructure period right now in Canada. And that's big because we're a petrodollar country in which climate change is, or in which petroleum is kind of core to our economy. It's going to be hard for us, but we have to do that. And we have to set that precedent so that we can talk to other countries.
Looking realistically, though, people know that the tar sands are going to be a stranded asset. Mm-hmm. We've invested all that money in trying to make that go. And it's the least attractive kind of oil in the world. And very quickly, oil is going to be unnecessary and useless. And, they're going to have to leave it in the ground. So everybody knows. Mark Carney being, the leading example, saying, don't invest in stuff like that. It's stupid investment.
Yeah. Yeah. What there's actually a thing called an EROI. I think it's called it's basically an investment strategy to understand how much energy has to go in to get a barrel of oil out. In conventional energy, it takes 1 barrel of oil and you can extract 25 barrels. Okay. Our tar sands, it takes 1 barrel of oil. Guess how much you get out of the ground for that? 3. Now, if you do full cost accounting and you actually take into account the actual full energy, like if you do full cost accounting, it actually works out to 1 barrel of oil, gets 1 barrel of oil out of the ground in the tar sands. Why are we doing that? It's insane. We are the silliest people, right? And so what we need to do is say, look, let's do full cost accounting, understand the actual long-term impacts of doing this, and then let's stop doing it. because the stone, there's a great quote: the Stone Age did not end for a lack of stones. And we just apply that to the oil age. So it's true. It's true. The oil age will not, we have to end the oil age because there are better ways of doing things. So leave the oil in the ground, even though it looks like it's a profitable business. It's not profitable.
So far, you've only talked about things that will reduce emissions or stop emissions. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's enough. I think you do that every bit that you can, and you still have to do more, which is negative emissions. We have to suck stuff out of the atmosphere. Yeah. And there are only a few, there are many ways of doing it, but most of them are probably not realistic in terms of being feasible economically or in terms of energy resources. But the two things that can make a huge difference are forestry and agriculture. And those can actually take, if you do it right, instead of what now is like a quarter of our emissions are coming from agriculture, it could be an actual reversal of that amount. It could actually capture and sequester that much every year. So we need to actually really change agricultural technology and forestry.
One of the best to-do lists, if you want to see how to do this, is to read Catherine Wilkinson's Drawdown, because Drawdown gives you the sort of top 100 things that we need to do, and they're surprising what they are. Like on the mitigation, we need to stop getting fossil fuels out of the ground. Okay,
I love that project Drawdown. Yes, it's wonderful. Yeah, everybody should be familiar with that.
Because the number one thing is actually to do with food. I think we can get 40% reductions in CO2 emissions very quickly through a change in how we eat and how we consume and how we produce food. And that's critical because, I mean, anybody in Canada should be able to see when you drive across the prairies, wow, did we ever industrialize agriculture towards a certain model? And if we were to change that model, it's actually you could do it fairly quickly. You can grow.
We've been working on regenerative agriculture on this project, Save the World. And it's not just reducing emissions. It will be negative emissions. It will actually suck more carbon out of the atmosphere than it emits.
However, Meta, there's something very important to understand here, and people get this. It's true that we can sequester, okay? But what people need to understand is there's two carbon cycles. One is called the biotic carbon cycle. It's the one where the biosphere has been rotating carbon and it's been cycling it, and you can do it with trees and sequester and so on, right? That has a certain budget. But our problem is that we're taking out of the ground carbon that has been fossilized for 650 million years worth, and we're dumping it into the atmosphere, into the biotic cycle. And so we're overloading. You can only grow so many trees to be able to absorb that, right? And we estimate even if you grew billions of trees right now, you can only get about a quarter of the emissions down. So we're going to so that's where people say, okay, well, let's figure out ways we can suck it out of the atmosphere and solidify it or carbon. We shouldn't hope for that right now. Our biggest hope right now is
you don't pin any hope on forestry?
Oh, I do. Oh, trust me. Forestry is absolutely fantastic, and we should be planting trees as fast as we can. But what I'm saying is, even if you planted all those trees all over the planet, it's not enough to be able to sequester 650 million years worth of fun. Because remember, just think of oil. What is oil? Oil is a bunch of...
Why do people have this thing that if you do negative emissions, it must be considered a way of substituting from for actually reducing the emissions? I mean, it's people use this reasoning all the time. You don't want to talk about the possibility of sucking carbon out because this will just provide an excuse for oil companies to say, well, we'll go ahead and spew this out because we'll offset it by planting trees. Yes, that is absolutely a criminal point of view, and you should not allow them to do it. But that doesn't mean we don't need to do both. We need to stop the emissions and we need to suck the stuff out of the atmosphere. So no, we cannot offset enough by forestry to overcome the amount that they're emitting. And we shouldn't even think of it that way. We should think of it this and this, both of them have to be done. Both of them.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. What I'm saying is don't assume, because what's going on is people will say, like the government stands up and says, we're going to plant 1 billion trees. And everybody goes, oh, good, problem solved. And what I'm saying is that's a misunderstanding of how carbon works. You see, because what I'm trying to say is if you've had $650 million worth of oil all down there, we're even just in Canada, 700,000 barrels a day of this stuff coming out. You can't do that with trees. Can't absorb. We don't have enough trees on the planet.
Of course. But it makes me furious though.
Yeah.
That people think of it as as just an either or. Why
No,
do you
that shouldn't
think
be.
of
We got to
it
do
as
everything we
something
can.
that, of course it can't offset it. Of course it can't make up for emissions. You have to do the emission reduction,
Yeah.
and that's not enough.
Yeah.
Just by
If you're on a sinking lifeboat, Meta, if it's
that's
an
not
emergency,
enough.
if we're on a sinking lifeboat, my suggestion is we do absolutely everything.
Absolutely everything. Yeah.
That's what an emergency is. It's like you plant trees, you stop the carbon emitters, you study how you can get carbon out of the atmosphere. Everybody work on this because the boat's sinking. That's the attitude I'm trying to say is the climate emergency attitude. And we're not there. There's something that's not landed emotionally in politicians and in Ottawa and in places because they haven't actually got it. If they actually got it and understood this, I think the temperature of the conversations would change very quickly to cooperation. You know, let's try.
Why would the wildfires not be enough to wake people up? Why would the floods not be enough to wake people up? Why would the hurricanes not be enough? I don't understand it because people are crazy. There's something pathologically wrong with us. Anyway.
Well, I think some of this comes down to social psychology. I do believe because why is it that a person can, even in COVID, can deny something right to the hospital bed? And that's the same phenomena around emergencies and planning. And we're going to have to recognize there's always going to be deniers. And we're going to have to overrule them at this point to survive. And that's what decision makers need to do. What's important right now is that we don't allow us to think in the politics in Canada that we actually even have time to fight about it. What we need is everybody standing up at all candidates meetings and so on and agreeing, look, I need your best ideas and you need my best ideas. And it's time to cooperate politically. Well, my agenda was to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, definitely stop fracking straight away, definitely stop old growth logging and change forestry practices, because as you said, we need to be planting trees, not cutting them down right now. And in British Columbia, it's very sad. I don't know if you followed this, but I think over 700 people now have been arrested trying to stop old growth logging here because we have so little old growth left on the planet. It should be a high priority to keep trees standing because they've locked all the carbon in them. You know, a big old growth tree has got a lot of locked carbon and you want to keep it standing at this point, not drop it on the ground or burn it, which is even worse, or turn it into toilet paper, which is even worse, right? So we're taking, even the tar sands and so on, we're taking vast areas. I think it's 2 million acres of boreal forest has been just turned into toilet paper, which gets flushed down the toilet. And it's even, you see, that's what I was saying about this full cost accounting. We have to keep thinking, making people accountable, think carbon as a poison, and every single thing we have to do, we have to be figuring out how to do that, right? Yeah, so those are the priorities, is to stop that. But then coming back to your idea of like a future, like one of the things about the future, Meta, is that we're going to have to not just think mitigation, stopping carbon, we're going to have to think adaptation. And at this point, we absolutely must figure out how are we going to build homes that are going to be resilient? How are we going to build communities that are going to be resilient? How are we going to change so that transportation, if we have to slow down transportation, people are living in places where there is public transit, where there is ways we can get around? How are we going to electrify? These are all the questions that there's an enormous number of possibilities here. And the good news is actually there's lots of entrepreneurial sort of money to be made, or if people need jobs, there's 5 times as many jobs in clean tech as there are in the oil industry. I'll just let me give you a figure. There's 128,000 jobs in the oil industry. There's 420,000 jobs in clean tech, and they expect by 2030 there'll be 620,000 jobs. You see what I'm getting at? It's not all a bad news story. If you're building wind generators or you're putting up solar panels, you're employed. You're feeding the kids, right? So we have to actually just go. It's about shifting away from things that don't work to things that do work and doing it really quickly.
I totally agree with you about the being real possibilities. And here's my new fantasy. Okay. I read something the other day. I watched a video about 2 big innovations that are converging, that are going to be with us in the next 5 years, big time.
Yeah.
Electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles.
Yeah.
We are no longer going to own cars because we are going to use our cell phone to call a taxi, which will come to our door within less than 5 minutes and take us wherever we want to go at a fraction of the cost of owning a car. Yeah. And this will be an electric taxi with no driver. And it will be very, very cheap, and we'll no longer have cars. Okay, that means we will also no longer need parking lots. Now, in addition, I am looking at this moment out my window where there are people trying to replace my lawn. And they've cut down a whole bunch of trees. I won't tell you why, stupid reason, I think, probably, but nevertheless. My point of view is that lawns are extremely pernicious. They absorb water, they use pesticides, they kill insects that we need, which means that we're losing pollinators and all kinds of things that we need. They're extremely destructive. They even use huge amounts of gasoline just to run the lawnmowers and so on. And so people should stop having lawns. And they're tearing up my lawn, but probably going to replace it with another lawn. I don't know. Point is this: we want to replace. There are in just the U.S. alone, and I don't have figures for Canada, 40 million acres of lawns. The amount of land used for lawns is greater than the amount used for corn or any other crop. So
that's an amazing
absolutely,
stat.
and it's all pernicious. It has no benefits whatever, except if you like to play croquet. Now, within 5 years, I propose that everybody get rid of their lawns. Don't dig them up because that just exposes the dirt to the air and emits the carbon that's already there. But dig little holes where you're going to plant things and put native trees or lots and lots of native trees.
Yeah.
Because what we need is forests. There's an outfit in Zurich that about 4 years ago did an estimate of how many trees there are in the world. There are 3 trillion trees. We need another at least 1 trillion trees more. And since most of the time they die, when you plant them, you probably better plant 3 trillion, 2 trillion anyway. Okay, how much is a trillion? It's 1,000 billion. So when Canada says, oh, we're going to plant 1 billion trees, nuts to that, you need to plant several hundred billion trees. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, the places that you have available, there are places where you could plant trees, but they're like hundreds of miles from cities. How are you going to get people there? You're going to take them in helicopters? How are you going to get them there? There are no roads where there are places. No. You can't use those spaces. Where you have space where people could be available to plant trees is in cities. Tear up your lawns, don't dig them up, but plant trees there, lots and lots of trees. And when you tear up those parking lots, which are going to go very soon, because we don't need, in 5 years, we'll all be taking these electric taxis. We don't need any parking lots because all these taxis will be running around all the time. Nobody's going to have a car. Nobody's going to need to park anywhere. So all these parking lots, including downtown, will be available. Let's pass a new ordinance saying, whenever you tear up a parking lot, you can't put anything else in there. You put trees. Everybody should now concentrate on putting as many trees in as possible. Now, there are ways of putting in trees, a system called the Miyawaki Forestry System, which is being developed by people in India. And what they do is they plant a lot of trees very close together, like 4 per square meter. And of course, they won't all live, but the trees themselves, you want a diversity of types of trees of different heights. They're going to be different heights. And they will decide for themselves which of these will live, and they will make an optimum decision. But you have to be there to water them and weed them for the first 2 years or 3. After that, you never have to weed them or water them again because they become really thick forests. And you can do it with a little piece of land, just the size of the place where you park your car instead of a garage. That's size of land. You could have a forest with hundreds of trees in that little thing. So all of these extra trillion trees that we need to plant, we can plant them right in our cities where there are people who can go water them and weed them and look after them for the first 2 or 3 years so they get going. And now we have these trees planted in this system grow twice as fast as other trees and sequester much more carbon. So that means that very quickly we begin to get forests in places where we can actually look after them and use them and have the beauty of a forest in our own cities replacing these ugly parking lots
Mhm.
and replacing these lawns that we don't need. If we have to convince people, though, that they should don't dig up their lawns, but poke holes and dig little holes where you can plant trees, and then plant these trees all over your lawn instead.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
my pitch.
I like it. No, we do need to plant as many trees as we can, and then find social factors or social reasons for why people would keep those trees standing and living, so that they can continue to sequester carbon. It reminds me, years ago, I got involved in what was called the Forest of Reconciliation. I think you'd like this because it was a bit of a peace project as well. We were in El Salvador, and I was working with the Salvadoran Center for Appropriate Technology. And the idea was that an entire mountain volcano had been bombed and phosphor bombed, and it was destroyed. And what they had been doing was trying to kill the opposition forces. And so they were just burning it and scorch. It was a scorched earth policy. People were living on the volcano. The guerrilla forces were living in and around the volcano. And so the army would come in and try to scorch earth them out. A scorched earth policy is where you just literally try to burn people out. So people are living underground or in tunnels. And, you could go, and I remember going there and seeing some of the tunnels that people hid. They hid inside the mountain. And what happened was they were just bombed. It was just like, when they did napalm bombing in Vietnam, same concept.
I've heard of such a thing before.
There was a time when people were just you can destroy the environment because people rely on the environment. So if you destroy the forests and the places where they're hiding, they have no place to hide. So the idea was just, it was terrible environmental cost of war, right? Which is a whole other subject. It would be very fascinating at some point.
But wait, this is in a war.
In a war, yeah. This was
they were digging holes to hide from not the volcano, but from enemies.
Yeah, there was a revolution going on back in the 80s. And so they would hide in these little bunkers and so on. And the point was that what we did is we planted what we called a forest of reconciliation. And the idea was that we worked with both sides after the war was over. Well, it wasn't 100% over, but we worked during this period to say, look, could we plant one tree for every soldier, every civilian, every person killed in this war? And we'll put their names on it. And it was harder to put their names on it, but what we did is we just started to plant the numbers. And so we tried to plant 75,000 trees. That was the number at the time, was 75,000. So our goal was to plant 75,000 trees. Now, what it did is it gave the social license to the community to not touch those trees. Do you see what I'm saying? Because people were living, that's a living memorial to the people that have died in this war. And that forest of reconciliation grew into a forest that people cared for. And at one point, unfortunately, there was some nasty politics that went on, and somebody tried to burn it down and so on. But they were quickly stopped by the community because people had the social license to realize that those trees are very important to keep standing. And we're going to need to have lots of strategies like that for people to plant trees, find reasons to plant trees, find reasons to keep trees standing. But I just do want to remind us, though, that is only one. We're still in a lifeboat. That's just the one thing. We need to have thousands of creative ideas like yours, Meta. And we need people like you to just keep dreaming up good ideas and trying them. And if that means that anybody who's watching this show just goes out today and goes, I'm just going to do something. I'm going to go and plant a tree right now. We need that kind of thinking where there is no one answer here. And this is maybe another thing I just wanted to talk to you about, is that climate change, the answer is not apparent. But the answer when we first walked into COVID wasn't apparent either. Everybody started trying things. They tried vaccines, they tried masks, everybody was trying different things, and we evolved through it and we survived, and we're still fighting it, and we're still not over, right? But we're still trying. And this is the key for climate change, is that nobody can hold up a flag and say, this is the answer to climate change. And if they do, they're actually an idiot, because it's too complex a problem. It's called a wicked problem. And wicked problems require many, many minds and many people coming together and saying, what's your good idea? What's mine? And can we build on them? Can we transcend and include both of our opinions to come up with a third new idea? That's what we're in the stage of right now. We're needing lots of ideas, lots of new ideas, and then put those together, which is why I'm emphasizing right now. This is my key point, is I'm trying to emphasize right now, we cannot have this, I know how to do it and you don't, put in the politics of Canada right now. We need to be coming together and saying, what's your good idea? What's your good idea? And let's transcend.
That's the reason, I have this show where every weekday I interview somebody about some new idea, but also the website to savetheworld.ca is meant as a place where all the new ideas we can find, people put them, post them, put them as comments, and then go and look and share them.
Yeah.
Because
and try them, and it becomes a clearinghouse of ideas, and some people will be absolutely sure their idea is correct, but it may not turn out to be that way. But isn't it great that they've got a place to try it and experiment? And that's how evolution works. Evolution works when you try different things. Like, at some point when we were fish, we tried getting out of the water and evolving feet, right? Or legs or whatever. Like, you try things, and evolution is full of mistakes that didn't work. But out of those ideas, something may work. And that's the state we're in right now. And we need to be friendly to ideas, not combating each other, but saying, if you've got a good climate change idea, like go plant trees in your front lawn, that's a good idea. Go try it and see if it's going to work. Because right now we're in an emergency. We need everybody, all hands on deck. Try your ideas.
Now, what you're doing now is you're running for office. And you mentioned the idea of all candidates meetings. It strikes me that could be a very good location for stimulating people to become more aware of the various options. Is that happening? Have you been going, or already are there any all candidates meetings?
There are in our riding. I mean, I'm going to my first one tonight. It'll be fun. Yes. It'll be online and virtual. People can do it. It's in Roberts Creek. And then I think there's 12 more lined up in our riding. So I'll be doing lots of all candidates meetings. Well, and I do believe
as Zoom, then people who are even not in your riding, it's worthwhile for people to watch them.
Absolutely.
Publicize where.
Yeah, they can go to our webpage. My webpage is just simply mikesimpson.ca, right? It's www.mikesimpson.ca. And that'll get you to our webpage where we post all the all candidates meetings. And those are good places where we can, you see, there's a big difference between a debate where you're, smacking into each other, and what I would consider to be a dialectic, which is where ideas evolve and you realize, hey, you've got a good idea. I've got a good idea. What's the better one when they come together? That's very old. That's the Socratic method. Back the Greeks would do this. They got together and they debated, but they were actually shooting for a dialectic. Because in the room, if Meta, you had an idea about trees and I have an idea about mitigation. And in our conversation today, we create some new way of thinking. That's evolution. That's how evolution works. Whereas if you and I battle each other, you go, it's all about this. And I go, it's all about that. And then we try to win. We're actually missing the point, which is that evolution is where we combine really cool ideas because we talk to each other. That's the value of what you do. Every day you talk to people. And somehow the new ideas emerge and it gets into social consciousness. And then that's where we move forward.
Do you have any idea of who these people are? Are they ready to hear bad news? And
good question.
Bad news in the sense that, a wake-up call kind of news.
Yeah, good question. I'll find out who comes to all candidates. This is the first time I've ever actually tried politics. And I told you why. I'm doing it because I view at this point, there's no time left. We just have to get down to some decision making that's really hard, and we got to do it. And so it's a bit of a long shot, to be honest, to win. As Green Party people, we're a much smaller party than the other ones. But I think if we can add to the debate or add to the discourse right now in a critical way, which is to say, actually, people, this is really, really serious, much more serious than people think. If that's the one thing
really worthwhile as an opportunity to put ideas out there that need to be discussed much more fully.
Well, and you do it every day. You do it every day. That's what I love about what you're doing is you're out there every day fun. Getting these ideas out there. Yeah.
It's actually the most fun I ever had in my life. I must say, I'm embarrassed to tell people that I've enjoyed this pandemic. Because I've been here and I've not gone out of my apartment, but I talk to people every day, and listening to ideas of people who, like you, are concerned. I mean, that's really what I want to do is just keep talking to people.
And you know what? You set an example, because people realize actually you could look at these things like pandemics or global climate change as complete disasters, or you can see them as opportunities, as you have done, to shift and change. And what you're doing now is speaking to people every day, through these the Zoom and so on. And there are ways we can adapt quickly. We have to see that there's always possibilities. It's not over till it's over, Meta. I think,
I would like everybody to make a wish for something, some little thing to do, like mine is about the trees and the parking lots and the lawns, but everybody with some practical thing, and then go around and lay it on your neighbors. I mean, just be obnoxious, insist on telling people about your ideas, just be bullies about saying the things that you think are important. And if we just had a rule that everybody has to tell somebody every day about some idea that they think would be useful, I think that'll wake us up. That'll keep us going.
Yeah. Especially if we actually do try them. Like, it's not too hard to plant a tree. I mean, you can do it. It's actually kind of fun, right?
Indeed. Okay, this has been fun. A lot
of fun. It has
been
been fun, Bennett. So good to talk to you again.
Good wishes for success there. I mean, I'm sure that even if you don't get elected, and I think that's how you're expecting to, but
well, actually, I might. You never know, because we're actually within shooting distance. We actually, in this riding, last time we came within 61 votes, believe it or not, of being Green Party in the provincial in this riding. Like in this, and so, and we also have captured 22% of the vote in the last. We came up from people are hearing us, and so right now we're within shooting distance of actually winning. So we'll see what people do in this election, and whether the smoke and the fires and all of that are making the green voices even more relevant for people.
It could very well be.
You never know.
Yeah, when I say that all people are stupid, maybe they're not so stupid.
Maybe they're not so stupid. Yeah, no, they're not. Certainly not in this riding. They're definitely paying attention. It's the number one issue in this riding by far. Yeah. So in that sense,
okay. Well, I don't think it's got that far here. I think probably BC. I think California too, and maybe all of the West Coast. It seems to me there's more consciousness there than some other places.
The smoke's coming, the heat's coming. It's just a matter of time, unfortunately. And the trick is the problem is by the time it gets to that, it's often too late at that point. And so that's our problem as a species, right? Yeah. But it's not that we're not able to see what's going on in other places. So I'm sure that if people can get inspired, it's like if they saw you plant those trees, Meta, on your front lawn, and they see it happen, then next thing you know, people are doing that. So that's the way the green movement will take off here, and is taking off, by the way, internationally. It's actually become a much bigger movement internationally very, very quickly. Look what's going on in Germany. I mean, that's actually a good show for you to look at that, the rise of the Greens in Germany.
Yeah, the Greens might actually win in Germany.
Won't be long. We will win eventually in Canada. I'm absolutely certain of that, because we just keep getting proven right. That's the interesting thing. Is like, just to give you an idea, 25 years ago, I used to go around with Elizabeth. Elizabeth May she was in the Sierra Club, and so was I. And we would go around and we had these pamphlets, and the pamphlets said, because of climate change, there may be as much as 3 times as many forest fires. And we outlined what would happen with forest fires. That was 25 years ago. And so you look back and you realize, wow, I was campaigning on that idea that we're living today 25 years ago, and people are shocked and taking action today. Well, people will be shocked and taking action in 12 years, in the year 2040, which is the year that everything clicks. It's 2040 where we hit the 1.5 degrees, and people are going to be going, what happened? And we'll be going, well, we told you. We were there. We told you. They will eventually vote green. Trust me. People will eventually vote green. It's just a matter of, are they catching up? Are they catching up? Because the discourse that we've been talking about is based on science. It's not based on politics. It's been based on the science that there will be 3 times as many forest fires. That was the science 25 years ago, and it's proven correct. It's very hard to get away from the science. You can't change physics.
I'm smiling and I'm crying, because you feel hopeful that maybe, and then you think, oh my God, look, what have we done?
Put those two feelings together. You put those two feelings together, and at the end of the day, you realize that's a powerful feeling inside when those two come together. Like if you don't choose them, you just say, put those two feelings together. And then that's what an activist is they understand the gravity of it. And yet they're also inspired at the same time. And that's a super powerful activist, right? And that's what we need.
It's actually great to talk to you, Mike, and it's great to be on the same team with you, because you're out there doing it. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Carry on, and good wishes. Yeah. Okay.